Hello, my loves, and welcome back! It's been a little while since the last Strange Playgrounds. I do these things on a whim. I really do. There's no consistency. I just sit down and start recording and blabbing about whatever's in my inconsistent, strange, wibbly-wobbly head. I really do. That's it for me. I very rarely plan these things. It's like my short stories. It's like my fiction, which, some of you may say, yeah, it shows. Yeah, that would be unkind, but true. I don't plan. I'm an enormous pantser in most things in my life, I'm perfectly honest. If I plan, things go wrong. I don't know why. It feels too rigid to me somehow. Everything works much better if I have a vague idea of what I'm trying to do and I just follow it. But I've wanted to talk about this subject almost since when this channel began, but I've never got up the chutzpah. It's so important. That's the thing. On a purely personal level, it's so important. This is one of those texts that is sacred to me, in the sense that it's one of the earliest. It's the stuff of one of my earliest formative memories, and also hugely significant with regards to the shape of my imagination. I don't think I'm engaging in hyperbole when I say this. What we're talking about, this subject, may be one of the keystones of my imagination. I think a lot of what I'm interested in now and what sparks my imagination and my enthusiasm derives from this show. And that's a strange thing to think. It really is. It is tonight, actually. It's the evening here in the UK. Very chilly, very autumnal. I love it. I love it to bits. It's my season. And one of the reasons I want to talk about this show is because I have an annual, a perennial tradition, as it were. I rewatch this show in its entirety. That's 8 seasons. Around this time, when the first breaths of autumn appear on the breeze, when the first leaves start to fall, I always rewatch this show from my childhood. And I watch every episode, I watch every season, and part of the reason for that is I love this season. Autumn and winter are my favourite seasons. Autumn in particular has such depth and variety and such a beautiful feeling and ethos about it. But also, this show used to air in my childhood around this time, so I have a very powerful association. We are, of course, after that very British, very prevaricating preamble, talking about Knightmare. No? Knightmare? Knightmare? No? Knightmare? Children's show from the 1980s and early 1990s here in the UK. Phenomenally popular. I don't think people understand just how significant this show is, because it's never been re-released, not officially. It's been re-aired a couple of times on some Sky channels in a very inconsistent manner, but there's never been like a dedicated DVD box, there's never been a Blu-ray, there's never been a streaming service that provides it. You have to get it in other ways.
3 steps forward.
And it's a shocker, to be honest, because for those who remember it, for those who were children at the time, Knightmare is almost universally a formative memory. Now, a lot of people don't even remember what it's called. I mean, that's really strange, right? People don't remember what it's called. But if you say to people of about my age, people who are in their early 40s, In the UK, if you say to them something like sidestep to the left, or put down the spyglass, or where am I, in a very particular tone, you will get a universal reaction. You'll see their eyes light up, and you'll see this wave of memory and nostalgia sweep over them, and they'll get very excited and agitated, and they'll say, "I remember that. I used to love that. I used to watch that all the time when I was at school." This was a British produced show when we actually had anything like a significant industry in children's entertainment in the UK, which, like many of our creative industries, we've allowed to wither. See, it was on CITV, children's. It was children's ITV, a channel that we have here in the UK. And CITV was a block of programming that ran from around, I think it was from around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it ran right the way through to 5 o'clock. And it would have gradations. So at 3 o'clock, it would be the programming for very, very young children, things like Thomas the Tank Engine and Rainbow and Creepy Crawlies and things like very young stuff that's aimed at very young children. And as the evening wore on, the shows would escalate in terms of their sophistication. So you would get shows that were aimed at like older children, 8 to 10-year-olds, and then very late on, from around 4:15, 4:30, you would get the shows that were aimed at high schoolers and teenagers. Yes, there was children's programming specifically aimed at older kids. And I miss that. I miss that not only for the sake of nostalgia, but it also created a sense of space and inclusion for those older children. It's a tangent, but one of the things that has happened in UK culture since I was born, since the 1980s, is the gradual diminishing of those spaces, particularly for older children, for teenagers, to the point whereby they literally have nowhere to be now, like nowhere, culturally speaking. And even physically, there's no spaces for them. There's nowhere for them to be. And then we bitch and moan when they loiter on street corners and whatnot, or act out against the society that actively out-exiles them from within itself. You know, it's bizarre. But Knightmare occurred in that latter block. It was aimed at older children. And it was when you look back at it now, it was one of the most spectacular experiments, not only in children's TV, but in TV in general. I don't know how they got away with making it at the time. So the way Knightmare worked, it was a virtual dungeon. This was in the mid-1980s when computer technology was only just starting to become available. Most households it was 1984, the year I was born, was the year the first season of Knightmare aired. So it would have been made in 1982, 1983, because things took a lot longer to make back then. So it was such a bizarre experiment. The technology really didn't exist to fulfill its vision. So, the creator, Tim Child, has always said the only reason they got away with it is because they had no idea what we were doing. They had no idea. They just thought it sounded interesting. Back then, the cultural landscape was completely different. There was no internet. There was no Sky television. There were only 4 TV channels when I was born, and that was it. That was your lot. That's what you got. Most households didn't have computers at home. That didn't really start until the later 80s and the early 1990s, when we had things like the Sinclair Spectrum here in the UK, the Commodore Amiga, which was my first computer. So the notion of this computer-generated virtual dungeon was bizarre. And the way it would work, it would be part Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game, part game show. So you would have a team of kids, there would be 4, and one of them would be designated as the Dungeoneer. And the Dungeoneer would be blindfolded with a very iconic horned helmet, the Helmet of Justice. Blind Justice, as the host Treguard would describe, to protect the user, the wearer, from the dangers of illusion. They had to say, by the way, they were mandated, they were required to tell the audience that the dungeon wasn't a real space, because it was quite scary, quite lethal as well. This show had a reputation for being a killer show. Hardly anyone won it. In all of its 8 seasons, hardly anyone won it. There's less than one winning team per season, but we'll get to that. The Dungeoneer would be the kid who would go down into the dungeon, and the other three would sit around a table and they would guide the Dungeoneer around the various rooms and chambers and corridors. They would have to evade traps by telling them to sidestep or to move this way or that way. They would interact with live action players, characters within the dungeon, who could present either possibilities or obstacles depending on their natures or how the Dungeoneers interacted with them. You would have monsters. This was the best part about Knightmare. There were monsters. There were creatures that would present obstacles. So there would be like little computer-generated ghosts and skeletons and magic swords that would appear. If they were taking too long in any particular room, if they were dithering too much, or you would get horde of music, like really scary, ominous music that would come through. And the host, Treguard, who was played by the actor Hugo Mayat, he would basically be the one who would guide the team through, but he would also create a sense of narrative and atmosphere for them. So he would say something like, "You're lingering too long in this chamber, team. Something is making its presence felt." And then you would get hackles go up on the back of your neck, and the team would start to panic, and they'd maybe make the wrong choice. They'd leave an item that they needed, or they'd dither into a trap, and if they took too long, then a creature would appear, a monster, an ogre, a goblin, or something like that, and it could kill them, As Treguard himself mentioned at the beginning of the show, this is no game of numerous lives. Here you have only one. And also, as they were making their way through the dungeon, they would have to sustain their life force, which it's basically a timer that escalated the tension, and it was brilliant. Everyone remembers the life force meter. It was a computer-generated face with a helmet. And as the time wore on, pieces of the helmet and the face would flake away. And underneath there was a skull. And eventually the skull would break and flake away. And if they took too long, if they didn't find food that they had to put in their little knapsack, they would die. They would starve, as it were. It was an amazing show. And honestly, an amazing show. The atmosphere was unreal. I recall as a young child, and as an older child as well, because I followed it religiously right through to its last season. But as a younger child, I recall Knightmare. Nature of memory, we've spoken about this on this channel many times. Nature of memory, this may be false, but I recall glimpsing Knightmare when I was so young. I must have only just been forming memory. And the memory in my mind is of a chamber with it's sandstone, it's orange stone with two archways in it, one of which is collapsed. And coming out of one of the archways is a giant snake. Now, when I was a child, and I mean like an infant, for the longest time that image lodged in my brain, and it formed the basis of things like nightmares and fantasies, and it was for some reason it just lodged in my head, but I didn't know what the show was. I didn't know what it was called, and for a while I didn't even know if it was real. I just recalled that image, and I didn't even know if I'd even really seen it, or whether I'd seen it in a nightmare or a fever dream or something like that. And then the third season of Knightmare hit. And the third season of Knightmare hit when I think I was 3 or 4. So I was old enough to recognize it. And that room was in that season. It actually recurred in that season. And suddenly I knew what it was. And this show captivated me. I loved the horror, obviously, the horror element of it. It's a damn scary show. For a kid's show, the sense of threat and of imminent menace is really strong. I always remember the first quest that went into the dungeon. Now, the first season of Knightmare is obviously really crude. They don't really know what they're doing. No one's seen the show before or seen anything quite like it. So the kids don't know what they're doing either. They don't have the benefit of prior seasons to understand, like, the rhythms and the tricks and just the general nature of the show. So the kids don't know what they're doing, and they make lots of mistakes. Also, the production team don't know what they're doing. I mean, there's been loads of interviews online about this. Hugo Myatt, who played Treguard, he's very candid. He says, like, I had an earpiece and I didn't know what I was doing, and sometimes the kids would do some random thing, and I would get a message in my ear saying, Hugo, don't let them go that way. They're going to walk into the wall or something. Don't let them do that. Send them down the fucking door. And he would have to react very quickly to guide them or to prevent them from walking off set or into a wall or something like that. But the first quest into the dungeon doesn't last very long. There's a magic lamp that they need to take in one of the clue rooms. There were clue rooms in every level, and the clue rooms were rooms where there were objects on a table, and the objects, there were lots of false objects and even harmful objects amongst the ones that could help your quest, that you could use. And in order to understand which ones to take, you often had to please another character by answering a question or a riddle, or there was a wall monster, a big animated face that would come through the wall, and it would ask riddles and questions, and if you got enough right, then it would give you advice on which items to take. It was often very vague, very cryptic, but if you got enough right, then you would often get like a fairly decent clue as to what to take, and often extra information as well, things like spells, passwords, etc., etc. But the first team, they make a mistake. There's a magic lamp that they need to take, and they don't. They don't take it, and they end up blundering into a room where it's completely dark. All they can see is a little bit of light around their dungeoneer, and there's this weird chord of music playing, and it's really frightening and disturbing. And then Treguard makes it worse. Treguard says, this darkness is being made by something that doesn't like visitors. Even now, it's making its dislike felt. And they die. They're the first team to die. It's really scary. It's really frightening. And that happens all the way through. They seem to go out of their way to make the quests and the monsters genuinely frightening. This first season, as I say, is very crude. They still don't really know what they're doing, so it's actually quite unfair as well. It's punishingly difficult. There are 3 levels to the dungeon, and hardly any in this first season get to level 2 or 3. Level 3, I think there's like 1 or 2 quests that get to level 3, and none of them make it through. It is so ridiculously hard, and that level of difficulty maintains throughout. It earned a reputation for being the great unbeatable show. And if you did win, it was such an accolade. It was such an accolade to win Knightmare, but this first season, I don't think there are any winners at all. Maybe there are. No, I don't think there are. I think the first winners appear in season 2. So, yeah, it's a very difficult show, but it is wonderful. It has this quality of not only just being a game show, but of having mythology. One of the things that really makes Knightmare a cut above anything else is that it's relayed with such passion and such verisimilitude. Like, Treguard talks all the time about how the dungeon dimension is made of magic, it's made of illusion, but it's sometimes dangerous, it's cruel illusion, which is why the helmet has to be worn. There's often an antagonistic character, which is often like an evil sorceress, or it's this evil sorcerer called Mogdred. Mogdred is only present in the first 3 seasons, and he's very scary. Very, very scary and threatening indeed. But there are also good characters like Merlin. There are other characters, Folly, the Jester, who help the Dungeoneers out in very cryptic ways, who give them advice and direction and whatnot. But almost every room is a puzzle in and of itself. They have to figure things out in order to take the right door or to progress in the right direction. And that escalating mythology that develops throughout as the series of Knightmare itself develop is wonderful. We'll talk more about it when we come to the latter seasons, because that's when it gets really, really interesting. The dungeon itself becomes like an entity. It becomes like a living thing in and of itself. It's such a wonderful concept. And all of that is communicated in this very subtle way by just little observations that Hugo Mayat makes, or that the characters within the dungeon make. It's really wonderful. Really wonderful. Like, for example, one of the things CITV required of the show very early on is that they show the kids who, the dungeoneers who die, quote unquote, because they fall into a pit or they get speared by some trap or whatever. The show was required to show that they're alive and okay, which they do. And Traegod has some line about how, although you perished in the dungeon dimension, here you are hale and hearty, or something like that, you know. It's really wonderful. Really, really wonderful. And there's something very compelling about it. It's got like an atmosphere to it, particularly these early seasons where all of the rooms are, they're actually painted. They're actually painted by an artist and then sort of digitized in a very crude way. And the crudity of the effect somehow enhances the atmosphere. It makes them very unsettling and very disturbing and off-putting in a very uncanny valley kind of way, which makes it even scarier. It makes it even scarier. And the show gets away with it by its self-description as a magical environment. You know, a place that's not entirely real. It really works. And coming back to it in 2025, there's something very compelling about that. Very compelling. Even though it's technically crude, that crudity has an explanation and becomes part of the mythology. It's almost like what we'd call ludo-narrative in video games these days. It's got a tangibility about it, which I really, really love. And that's what carries it. That's what carries Knightmare. I mean, people have been trying to recreate it for years, absolutely donkey's years, but I'm not convinced it would be any better just because the technology is there now. There's something about it. It's difficult to describe. You can find it here on YouTube. I would go, type in Knightmare Series 1, and you'll find it. You'll find it. It's very interesting. The first series, as I say, is crude and it's still finding its feet, so it is a bit slower than later seasons. Later on, they really they find out techniques, how to make everything a bit more fluid and a bit faster and a little bit more punchy, so it's got a bit more rhythm about it. But it's still fascinating. I mean, beyond anything else, if you want a window into what was obsessing and fascinating children in the mid to late 1980s and early 1990s, Knightmare's a pretty good one. Knightmare is a pretty goddamn good one. Another interesting thing about Knightmare, it's oddly progressive, and I mean oddly progressive. It mixes and matches the sexes of its teams. You often get a team that's made of boys and then a team that's made of girls, and it swaps and mixes and matches throughout. In the 1980s in children's television in the UK, that did not happen. That didn't happen. Everything was very gender codified. Everything was very gender codified. So a show like Knightmare, you would have expected to be aimed primarily at boys, but it turned out that the show had mass appeal. It crossed those boundaries, and so the contestants crossed those boundaries too. Really cool, right? Not only that, but the age range of the viewers was massive. Absolutely massive. The youngest contestants would be about 11, I think, around 11, 12, and the eldest would be knocking their late teens. Really weird, right? And the viewership was like that too. It gained a reputation as one of those shows that everyone would watch. the youngest members of the household, the oldest members of the household, and that was wonderful too. I have very vivid memories of sitting down to watch it with my tea after school on a Friday, because it always aired on a Friday, with my mum, who would sit watching it, and she would be really invested. She would be like screaming at the screen, "Go left, go left, no, no, no," all this stuff, and everyone would get into it. It was a thing, it was a phenomena, and at its height, and I only learned this much later, obviously, with the advent of the internet. At its height, Knightmare was pulling in the kinds of viewing figures that no show gets these days outside of the internet. Like no broadcast television would ever get. But even at the time, it was equaling some of the higher profile adult shows which were record breakers for viewership. It was really popular, really popular. And we'll talk about why it was cut, why it was cancelled when we get to Series 8. Because I'm going to go through each season. I'm going to go through each series one by one. Series 1 is the crudest of them all, there's no doubt, because it's the first, it's the earliest. And so it's a bit slower, it's not quite as technically apt as the others. They would learn later on a lot of tricks for making it feel a bit more tight and structured, and a bit more fair as well. Series 1 is really damn unfair. It really is. A lot of the Dungeoneers, it's not really their fault. They don't really know what they're doing, and they die more by accident than anything else, really. Or simply because the format of the show hasn't solidified yet. So, it's not their fault. It's really not their fault. But yeah, it is still, to this day, one of my favourite shows. Also, we've spoken a lot on this channel about how nostalgia doesn't necessarily hold up a lot of the time. You go back to a lot of shows that you watched when you were a kid, and beyond nostalgia, they really don't stand up. Knightmare, I watch once a year, every year, in its entirety, and have been doing so for years. And every time I come back to it, it amazes me. It amazes me that it exists. It's one of those pieces of media where I'm like, how? How does this exist? Because it's unique. There was never anything like it before. There was never anything like it at the time, and there's never been anything like it since. It is a unique artifact, and the fact that it ever came about is a minor miracle. And if you want to understand me, by the way, if you want an insight into the way my imagination works and what I was like as a kid, because this show attracted a very particular kind of kid in the 80s, I'm telling you. This was before the internet made D&D and fantasy and being geeky popular. It was the reserve of a very particular subculture. And I was a geeky kid, I'm telling you. I was that kid who liked RPGs and fantasy and Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and Pratchett and role-playing games and all of that stuff, comics. I was that kid. And Knightmare may have either been tailor-made for me, or it may have informed those obsessions. It's hard to say. It's very hard to say. But yeah, Knightmare. Woof. It's so good, guys. Knightmare is so, so good. Knightmare Series 1. Type it in, go and watch it. It's wonderful. Until next time, my loves. Bye-bye!